At my sister's wedding, I found my name scribbled in pen on a napkin next to the kids' table. Her husband grinned. "We thought you'd be low maintenance." Then I noticed my $8,000 gift had already been opened. I picked it up, smiled, and declared, "Then you won't mind if I take this back." His smile faded. "Wait, are you serious?" I, 32M, stood in the corner of the reception hall, staring at a crumpled napkin with my name scrawled in blue pen. It sat on a plastic folding table surrounded by sticky juice boxes and half-eaten chicken tenders. The kids' table. My sister had seated me at the kids' table at her own wedding. The weight of the moment pressed against my chest. I'd driven 11 hours to be here. I'd taken time off work. I'd spent weeks agonizing over the perfect gift, finally settling on an antique jewelry set our grandmother had promised to my sister years before she passed. The appraiser valued it at $8,000. I'd had it restored, cleaned, and placed in a custom presentation box. And she'd put me next to a 6-year-old who was currently launching peas across the room with a spoon. My brother-in-law appeared beside me, his tuxedo slightly rumpled from the ceremony. He glanced at the napkin, then at me, and his mouth stretched into a grin that made my stomach turn. He told me they'd figured I'd be low maintenance about the seating arrangement. Said they needed the real tables for important guests. His emphasis on the word real felt like a slap. I asked him what he meant by that. My voice came out calmer than I felt. He shrugged and explained they had a lot of actual family and close friends to accommodate. Said I'd understand. Then he laughed and clapped me on the shoulder before walking away. Actual family. The words echoed in my head. I was her brother. We'd shared a bedroom until I was 14. I'd taught her to ride a bike. I'd scared off her terrible boyfriend in high school. I'd co-signed her first apartment lease when no one else would. Apparently none of that qualified me as actual family. I moved through the reception hall in a daze, past tables draped in ivory linen and decorated with elaborate floral centerpieces. Each table had formal place cards in elegant calligraphy. I recognized cousins I barely knew seated at the main tables. I saw my sister's college roommate who she hadn't spoken to in 5 years sitting 3 tables from the front. Then I found the gift table. The custom mahogany box sat open, its velvet interior exposed. My sister's hand was literally inside it, lifting the necklace to show a cluster of her friends. They cooed over the emeralds and the delicate gold work. Someone asked where she got it, and she waved dismissively, saying it was just something from her side of the family. She didn't mention me, didn't acknowledge the effort or the cost or the meaning behind it. Something cold settled in my chest. I walked over to the table. My sister was mid-laugh about something, the necklace still dangling from her fingers. I reached out and took the box from the table. Her head whipped around. She asked what I was doing. I told her I was taking back the gift. Her face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, then irritation, then something that might have been panic. She asked if I was joking. Her friends had gone silent. I picked up the necklace from her hand, placed it carefully back in the box, and closed the lid. I told her she wouldn't mind since I was apparently low maintenance. Since I wasn't actual family. My brother-in-law materialized out of nowhere. His face had gone red. He demanded to know what I thought I was doing. Asked if I was serious. I looked him directly in the eye and told him I was completely serious. Explained that low-maintenance people don't give $8,000 family heirlooms as gifts. Said those are reserved for actual family at real tables. My sister's voice went shrill. She insisted I was making a scene. Told me to stop being dramatic. Said it was just a seating arrangement and I was blowing everything out of proportion. I asked her when she'd opened the gift. The reception had barely started. The ceremony had ended 40 minutes ago. She stammered something about wanting to see what it was. Her husband cut in and said they had every right to open their gifts whenever they wanted. I agreed with him. Told them they absolutely had that right. Just like I had the right to take back a gift given under false pretenses. I thought I was giving it to my sister. But apparently my sister didn't consider me family, so the whole foundation of the gift was based on a misunderstanding. People were starting to stare. A few cousins had their phones out. My sister's face had gone blotchy with anger and embarrassment. She hissed that I was ruining her wedding. Demanded I put the box back immediately. I tucked it under my arm and told her I hoped she enjoyed her special day. Said I was sure her actual family and real guests would make it memorable. Then I turned and walked toward the exit. My mother intercepted me near the door. She wanted to know what was happening. Said people were talking and my sister was upset. I explained the situation calmly. Showed her the napkin with my name on it. Told her about the kids' table comment and the actual family remark. Her face fell. She tried to defend it at first, said my sister had been stressed with the planning and probably didn't mean anything by it. But I could see in her eyes that she knew exactly what had happened. She'd probably known about the seating arrangement all along. I asked her if she'd known where they'd put me. She hesitated too long before answering. That told me everything I needed to know. I told her I loved her, but I was leaving. Said I'd call her later. The drive home took longer than the drive there. I kept replaying moments in my head. All the times over the past year when my sister had been distant. The phone calls she didn't return. The family dinners she'd skipped. I'd attributed it to wedding stress, to her being busy with planning. Now I wondered if it had been intentional pulling away. When I got home, I sat in my apartment staring at the mahogany box. Part of me felt guilty. It was her wedding. The gift had been meant for her regardless of how she treated me. But the larger part of me felt vindicated. Felt like I'd finally stood up for myself after years of being the accommodating younger brother. My phone started buzzing around midnight. Text messages flooded in. My sister demanded I bring the gift back immediately. Said I'd humiliated her in front of everyone. Threatened to never speak to me again. I didn't respond. My brother-in-law sent a message saying I was petty and childish. Accused me of being jealous of their happiness. I blocked his number. 3 days passed. The messages kept coming. Some from relatives I'd barely spoken to in years. All lecturing me about family obligations and forgiveness. A few took my side, saying what my sister did was cruel. The family had effectively split into camps. Then my father called. He didn't yell or lecture. He just asked me to explain what happened from my perspective. So I did. I told him everything, including things I hadn't mentioned to anyone else. How my sister had asked me for money 6 months ago for the wedding, and I'd given her $3,000. How she'd asked me to help move furniture into their new house, and I'd taken a weekend to drive up and help. How every time she needed something I'd been there. But the moment it was her turn to show up for me, I got a napkin at the kids' table. My father was quiet for a long moment. Then he told me he understood. Said he'd talk to my sister, but he wouldn't force me to do anything I didn't want to do. That meant more than anything else anyone had said. Update 1. 2 weeks after the wedding, my sister showed up at my apartment. She looked exhausted. The triumphant bride glow had faded into something hollow and stressed. She asked if we could talk. I let her in. We sat across from each other in my living room, the mahogany box sitting on the coffee table between us like a physical representation of everything broken between us. She started crying before she even began speaking. Told me she was sorry. Said she didn't know what she'd been thinking with the seating arrangement. Claimed her husband had been the one pushing for it, saying they needed to prioritize his family and their important friends. She'd gone along with it because wedding planning had been so stressful and she'd just wanted everything to be perfect. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I asked her why she'd gone along with it. Reminded her that I was her brother, not some distant relative she felt obligated to invite. She admitted she'd gotten caught up in trying to impress her husband's family. They had money, connections, social status she'd never had growing up. She'd wanted to prove she belonged in their world. And somehow that had meant pushing aside the people who'd actually been there for her. I asked about the actual family comment. She flinched. Swore her husband had said that without her knowing. Claimed she'd confronted him about it afterward, and they'd had a massive fight. Said he'd apologized and admitted he'd been out of line. Part of me wanted to believe her. Part of me wondered if she was just doing damage control. I asked about the $3,000 I'd given her. Asked if she remembered that. Asked if she remembered me helping them move. She nodded miserably. Said she remembered everything. Told me she'd been a terrible sister, and she understood if I couldn't forgive her. I sat back and looked at her. Really looked at her. She seemed smaller somehow, diminished. The confident bride who'd been showing off jewelry to her friends had been replaced by someone who looked lost and scared. I told her I needed time. Said I couldn't just pretend everything was fine because she'd shown up and apologized. Explained that she'd hurt me deeply and I needed space to process it. She accepted that. Asked if I'd consider returning the jewelry set eventually, even if I wasn't ready to forgive her yet. Said it meant a lot to her because it had been Grandma's. I told her I'd think about it. Walked her to the door. She hugged me before leaving and I let her, but I didn't hug back. After she left, I opened the box and looked at the jewelry. The emeralds caught the light, glittering like trapped stars. Grandma had worn this set on her wedding day. She'd promised it to my sister when we were kids, always said it would be hers someday. I'd honored that promise even after Grandma passed, and the jewelry came to me as part of her estate. But looking at it now, I wondered if Grandma would have wanted it to go to the person my sister had become. Grandma had been fierce about family loyalty. She'd lived through poverty and hardship, had held our family together through sheer force of will. She wouldn't have tolerated anyone treating family as disposable. Update 2. A month later, my brother-in-law called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. He didn't apologize right away. Instead, he launched into a speech about how marriages required compromise and how I was making things difficult for my sister. Said the wedding was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, and I'd tainted it. Told me I needed to be the bigger person and return the jewelry. I let him finish. Then I asked him a simple question. I wanted to know if he actually understood why I'd taken it back. He sputtered something about me being offended over a seating chart. Said everyone had to sit somewhere, and I'd taken it too personally. I explained it to him carefully. Told him it wasn't about the chair. It was about being treated as an afterthought by people I'd consistently shown up for. It was about being called low maintenance as if that were an insult rather than a compliment. It was about the casual dismissal of my presence and my relationship with my sister. He argued that they'd had limited space and tough decisions to make. Insisted I was being unreasonable. I asked him where his estranged cousin had been seated. The one he'd mentioned having a falling out with years ago. He went quiet. I told him I'd heard through the family grapevine that his cousin had been at table 7. Not the kids' table. Not a napkin. A real seat with a real place card. He tried to justify it, saying his parents had insisted on inviting the cousin for appearance's sake. That's when I understood. It had never been about limited space or tough decisions. It had been about appearances. About who looked important and who could be shuffled aside. I'd been deemed unimportant, not worth the effort of a proper seat, while people they barely knew or actively disliked got preferential treatment. I told him I was done with the conversation. Said if my sister wanted to talk to me, she could call herself. Then I hung up. 3 days later, my mother called with news. My sister and her husband were having serious problems. The wedding debt was worse than they'd admitted. The $3,000 I'd given her had barely made a dent. They'd put another $40,000 on credit cards trying to fund the elaborate ceremony. Now they were fighting about money constantly, and my brother-in-law's family had stopped helping them financially after learning about the debt. My mother seemed to be hinting that I should forgive my sister because she was going through a hard time. I asked if my sister had specifically sent her to guilt-trip me. Mom admitted she was calling on her own, but said she was worried about my sister. Told me family was supposed to stick together during difficult times. I reminded her that I'd been stuck at the kids' table. Asked her when exactly family loyalty was supposed to apply to me. She went quiet. Then, to her credit, she apologized. Said she should have spoken up about the seating arrangement when she'd first learned about it. Admitted she'd been conflict-averse and hadn't wanted to cause problems before the wedding. I appreciated the honesty. Told her I loved her, but I was still processing everything. Update 3. 2 months after the wedding, I received a formal letter from a lawyer. My sister and her husband were demanding the return of the jewelry set, claiming it was a wedding gift that legally belonged to them once given. They were threatening to sue if I didn't return it within 30 days. I took the letter to my own lawyer. She read it, looked up at me, and actually laughed. She explained that gifts given before or during a wedding ceremony were generally considered the property of the couple, but gifts could be revoked if they were obtained through fraud or misrepresentation. More importantly, since I'd taken the gift back the same day it was opened, before the reception ended, there was a strong argument I'd never actually completed the gift transfer. She also pointed out that the jewelry had been left to me in Grandma's will. I had documentation proving ownership. My sister had no legal claim to it beyond the assumption it would eventually be hers. I authorized my lawyer to respond. Her letter was polite but firm. It outlined the circumstances of the gift, noted that the transfer had been revoked the same day due to misrepresentation of our family relationship, and included a copy of Grandma's will showing my ownership of the jewelry. She concluded by suggesting that pursuing legal action would be expensive and unlikely to succeed. My sister called me crying after receiving the letter. She begged me not to let lawyers get involved. Said they couldn't afford a legal battle. Told me her husband was furious and their marriage was falling apart. I asked her why she'd sent the lawyer letter in the first place. She claimed it had been her husband's idea. Said he'd convinced her they were entitled to the jewelry and could force me to return it. She'd gone along with it because they desperately needed money and thought they could sell the set to pay down their wedding debt. Something cold settled in my stomach. I asked her directly if she'd planned to sell Grandma's jewelry. She hesitated before admitting they discussed it, said they were drowning financially and didn't know what else to do. I told her the conversation was over, said I'd be keeping the jewelry and she should never contact me about it again. Then I hung up. My father called an hour later. He'd heard about the lawyer letter, wanted to know what I planned to do. I explained everything to him, including the revelation that they'd wanted to sell Grandma's jewelry to pay for their overspent wedding. He was furious, not at me, but at my sister. He said Grandma would be rolling in her grave, told me he supported whatever decision I made about the jewelry. Then he said something that stuck with me. He told me that sometimes people need to face the consequences of their choices, that protecting them from those consequences doesn't help them grow. 6 months have passed since the wedding. My sister and I haven't spoken. I heard through family channels that she and her husband are in marriage counseling and working on their debt. Some relatives still think I should forgive her and return the jewelry. Others have quietly reached out to say they admired me for standing up for myself. The jewelry sits in a safe deposit box now. I haven't decided what to do with it long term. Part of me wants to honor Grandma's wish that my sister have it eventually. But another part of me knows that the sister Grandma promised it to doesn't exist anymore, or maybe never did. I've learned something important through all of this. Being low maintenance isn't a virtue when it means letting people treat you as disposable. Being family isn't just about blood relations or shared history. It's about showing up, making space for each other, treating each other with basic respect and dignity. My sister failed that test. And while I'm sad about the loss of our relationship, I'm not sorry for taking back the gift. Some lines, once crossed, fundamentally change everything. She chose to cross that line when she scribbled my name on a napkin and seated me with children. I chose to have enough self-respect to walk away. Maybe someday she'll understand why. Maybe someday I'll be ready to forgive her. But that day isn't today, and I'm finally okay with that. If you like this story, please like this video and subscribe us for more such real-life-based stories. Thanks in advance.